Shabbat Shalom and Chanukah Sameach. Happy Hanukkah. It's so nice to see all of you on this holiday, and it was really nice also earlier this week. It was so special at the town Chanukiah lighting. It was wonderful to see many of you there. There was gelt and like little menorahs being dropped from the firefighters from way high up. It was so special. It was really wonderful coming together also with Temple Isaiah and Chabad. And for me, still being fairly new in the community, I met some people who I had only spoken with over phone or email, and I got to actually connect in person, which was really always lovely for me. And if that applies to you, then come say hi. And that's something that I've really loved about being new in a community, right? Going from just a name or a face and actually connecting with a person and hearing their story. And getting to do that really with so many people. And so today what I want to do is actually do that with one of the characters in our Parsha. And that character will be Osnat, the wife of Joseph, who he marries in this Parsha, in Parashat Miketz. And she really only comes up, like she's just mentioned as Joseph's wife. We don't really get a lot of information about her, and this is actually true with a lot of women in the Torah, right? Even getting a name, actually, is more than a lot of women in the Torah get. And so when I want to learn more, I have some books that I go to. One of them is this book called The 5 Books of Miriam, a women's commentary on the Torah by Ellen Frankel. And she said something in this week's that I really appreciated. So what the book does is it imagines all of our foremothers, important women in Jewish history, mostly from the Torah, also from rabbinic times, and imagines what they would say about that week's Parsha. And so she points out that this story of Joseph spans 4 Parshiot. It's very long. It covers a lot, but it's really pretty much all about men, right? And patriarchy and brothers and fathers and sons and all of that complicated stuff. And we don't hear a lot about the women. And then she imagines that Miriam says this: like the ancient rabbis, we need to imagine lives for the many women who must have been involved in this drama. The brothers' wives left behind to fend for themselves while their husbands go down to Egypt. The many maidservants who prepare for the journeys, tend Pharaoh's court, weave and cook, nurse and wipe bottoms, sing lullabies and keen at funerals. Indeed, a whole world of women contributes, albeit behind the scenes, to this drama. We owe it to them to serve as archaeologists and imaginers of their lives. Archaeologists and imaginers of their lives. So that's what we're going to do today for Osnat. Can I have some help passing these out, please? Let's see if I was overambitious in my printing. Okay, so this is where Osnat is introduced. Vayikra Paro Shem Yosef Tzofnat Paneach, vayiten lo et Osnat bat Potifera kohen on leisha, vayetze Yosef al Eretz Mitzrayim. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Tzofnat Paneach, and he gave him for a wife Osnat, daughter of Potifera, priest of On. Okay, so Joseph, in his rise to power, gets a new Egyptian name, Tzofnat Paneach, and a new Egyptian wife. Okay, so Osnat apparently means she who belongs to the sun goddess. I'm not sure how this is pronounced, Neith, okay? And her father is a priest for idol worship, right? Her name and her lineage emphasize to us just how Egyptian she is, right? And how marrying her is also a part, or seems to be a part, of Joseph becoming more Egyptian as well. She's mentioned again. Before the years of famine came, Joseph became the father of 2 sons, whom Osnat, daughter of Potifera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Menashe, meaning God has made me forget completely my hardship and my parental home. And the second he named Ephraim, meaning God has made me fertile in the land of my affliction. Okay. So even from the names of Manasseh and Ephraim, you can hear that he's really making his home in Egypt, right? He's really becoming Egyptian in a way. And we learn that Osnat is not only Joseph's wife, right, but she's the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh, whose descendants become entire tribes of Israel. Ephraim and Manasseh, who we invoke when we bless our children on Friday night, right? We say, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. So she's an important matriarch of Israel, and yet we know so little about her. So without looking ahead on your source sheet, what questions do you have about Osnat? What would you have wanted the Torah to tell us about her, about Joseph's wife and the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh? No wrong answers. What would you be curious to know about her? How they met. Great. Roberta. How she felt about not having Egyptian names for her sons. Lou?
How does she feel about raising her sons to Joseph's foreigners' standards? Ephraim and Manasseh were raised as Israelites.
How does she feel about raising Ephraim and Manasseh to a foreign kind of standard because they were raised as Israelites? Zach?
How does she feel about getting married to this strange guy at her father's command?
How does she feel about getting married to this strange guy? Yeah, Maylee? What did she think of Joseph's family? Maylee?
How did she feel about her ancestry? Doesn't come from a particularly welcome crowd. Her maternal and her father.
Okay, so we haven't heard anything about her mother yet, right? You might be getting ahead of me. You might know where we're going here. That's okay. Okay. Yeah, Barbara. Great. Potiphar sounds remarkably similar to a character from last week's Parsha, Potiphar, or was it 2 Parshiot ago, right? And so indeed the Talmud tells us that it's the same person, and that Osnat is the daughter of Potiphar, whom Joseph served, and there was the whole business with Potiphar's wife kind of setting up he said, she said situation with Joseph and wrongfully accusing him, and he gets sent to the prison. And so this is seen in the Talmud as kind of an admission of innocence from Potiphar, but that by giving his daughter to Joseph in marriage, he admits that Joseph was innocent after all and kind of acknowledges his righteousness. Okay. Yeah. Right. So yeah, whoever asked how they met, it seems like Pharaoh was their matchmaker. Okay, so one thing we didn't know about Pharaoh is he plays matchmaker. Okay, so we're not going to answer all of those, but I think it's important to ask those kinds of questions, right? Because those are the seeds of Midrash, right? And our ancient sages, they could never settle for so little information either, right? So they fill in the gaps. They write Midrash. So the Midrash we're going to look at, it's from Pirkei to Rabbi Eliezer. It's dated to around 650 to 900 CE. It's going to take us back to Parashat Vayishlach. I'll give a bit of a content warning that we're dealing with the story of Dinah, which involves sexual violence, but we're not going to focus on that, but it is part of the story. So Dinah, the daughter of Leah and Jacob, the sister of the 12 brothers, right? So this is going back to her story. What did Shechem, the son of Hamor, do? He seized her, Dinah, and he slept with her, and she conceived Osnat. The sons of Israel said that she should be killed, for they said that now people would say in all the land that there was an immoral daughter in the tents of Yaakov. What did Yaakov do? He wrote the holy name upon a golden plate and suspended it about her neck and sent her away. She went her way. Michael the angel descended and took her and brought her down to Egypt to the house of Potiphar, because Osnat was destined to become the wife of Yosef. Okay, so for this midrash, it tells us that Osnat is not the biological daughter of Potiphar, right? But is actually the daughter of Dinah. And her story here is just as much really marked with violence and this familial conflict as the story of Dinah and also as the story of Joseph, right? We see again the brothers' cruelty, right? Their disregard for the lives of their own family members. And we see that she's actually a relation, right? She's from Joseph's family. What is motivating? What do you think would be motivating the author of this midrash to say that Osnat is actually Jacob's long-lost niece? They really didn't have to go there, right? But what might motivate them to go there? Eyal? Okay, so it could be problematic that Osnat is not Jewish. Eyal points out that we usually think of Judaism going through the maternal line. That's not the case in the time of the Torah yet, but for later commentators who go that way, they might want that to be the case in this story. And we also don't really have Jews yet either, right? But we already do have this preference in the Torah for marrying relatives, right? It's not our current value system, and even within the Torah, they're later going to prohibit many of the familial relationships, but one that does remain permitted is between a man and his niece. I think it was seen as strengthening relationships within the family. And so instead of marrying this Egyptian woman, which might be problematic for the descendants, he has married actually someone from within his own clan, within his own family. Anyone else? What's motivating them? What might motivate them to say this? Yeah, Terry. So Terry's pointing out also by having a mother who is from within their own group, it makes Ephraim and Manasseh somehow more legitimate. Maybe I'll add maybe less Egyptian if it would be problematic to be Egyptian. Anyone else? Okay, Rose. Excellent, thank you. So we never really hear what happens to Dinah after this one horrible thing that happens to her, right? Her story is cut off, and by giving her a daughter and continuing the story of her daughter, we actually kind of continue Dinah's story too. We give her some honor in that way. And Rose is also pointing out we have a principle called the conservation of biblical personalities, which is if you can combine characters and say that these two people were really the same. So it makes another connection. Okay, we're going to move on. I'll add another thing that I think this midrash is doing. One thing it's doing is it's really paralleling the story of Yosef, right? The brothers want to kill Yosef, but instead they settle for selling him into slavery, and he winds up in Egypt, right? Where in Egypt he ends up in a noble class. Okay, Osnat, the brothers want to kill her, but somehow she's saved by being sent away. She ends up in Egypt, but still within a noble class. She's in a clergy family, right? Clerical. And she also gets this special necklace from Jacob, right? Kind of mirroring the Technicolor dream coat. And it adds another layer of fate and divine providence, right? Throughout Joseph's story, God is keeping tabs and setting things up so that he can rise to power at the right time, be in the right place at the right time, right? And we're seeing that even that is happening with who his wife is, right? That God is setting him up to marry someone from his own family and have that reunification in that way. And so it adds that layer of divine providence. Okay, so we're going to bring in another element. So as Ellen Frankel said in the 5 books of Miriam, we need to become the archaeologists and imaginers of biblical women's stories. Even the traditional midrash only gives us so much, right? One thing it's missing is anything from Osnat's perspective, okay? And here is where modern midrash comes in. So this book, Sisters at Sinai, another one of my go-tos, it's by Rabbi Jill Hammer. It's a collection of midrash about women in the Tanakh, and it's written in short story form. So it gives a different perspective from classical midrash, right? The midrash from Pirkei to Rabbi Eliezer that we just looked at, it tells us what people do and say, but it doesn't tell us what people think and feel. And so because it's in short story format, it's a little too long to really read together, but I'll share a little bit about her story about Osnat, and then we'll look at an excerpt. So this story is called Shimon's Prison, and in it, Rabbi Hammer imagines that Osnat actually visits Shimon, Joseph's brother, while he's imprisoned in Egypt. So if you remember from the Torah reading, Joseph sets it up so they have to leave Shimon behind while they go get Benjamin. And so he's there in an Egyptian prison, right? Then the story alternates between their different perspectives, okay? In this retelling, when Osnat shows Joseph her gold necklace, he recognizes what this means. Like, he knew that Dinah's daughter was given a necklace and sent away, and so they actually know the relationship. And then when Shimon is imprisoned by Joseph, she visits him in prison without telling Joseph, and she doesn't reveal her identity to Shimon either. Okay, she asks to hear stories of his family back home, and she learns about her family of origin, which she had been curious about. So we'll read a little from her perspective as Rabbi Hammer imagines it. Sometimes, when Joseph was half asleep, he told her how his family had made a covenant with God to be a holy people, dedicated to God alone. And he spoke to her the many strange names of the generations of Abraham. Yet he would never tell her real stories of their family. Stories about growing up, about playing and laughing, stories of brothers and sisters. She wanted so desperately to learn about the mother who had birthed her and about her grandfather and grandmother. Now, through Shimon, she had learned. It saddened her, frightened her, to know she had come from a place of violence and pain. Shimon had told her, though, that her mother loved her. That gave her some peace of mind. She had no doubt of her place in Potiphar's family by her father's side, yet this new family was beginning to touch her heart and stir her loyalty. At dinner, she would have to force herself not to ask her husband, "How long do you plan to keep my uncle in prison?" And so then, as she and Shimon connect, it's also, from his perspective, he reflects on his past mistakes, his anger towards Joseph, his vengeance upon the people of Shechem after what their prince did to Dinah. He reflects on all the toxic family dynamics that led to all of these problems, right? And then Osnat, without revealing her identity, she also opens up about her own concerns. She's worried about Ephraim and Manasseh and the way that they're interacting as brothers with competition and conflict, kind of going along this route that we know has been toxic so far. And Shimon, as part of his teshuvah, he thinks he's learned something, and so they set it up for him to actually meet Ephraim and Manasseh and to kind of share a little of what he's learned or mentor them in a way to help them get back on track with getting along, right? And so from what you've heard so far, the excerpt that we've seen in my summary, what do you think this retelling adds that we didn't get from the Midrash or from the Torah? Mike.
I need somebody to explain this to me. Shimon was in prison at the time. He didn't know that she was married to Shimon's brother Yosef, right?
Yeah, in the story, yeah.
So why would Shimon share with this person any family secrets unless she told him ahead of time? This is making my head spin. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If she's worried about her uncle Shimon, she should stop and think that she's married to her uncle.
Yeah. Okay.
This is like that song, I'm my own grandpa.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, part of it really is pretty nuts and pretty confusing. I think I probably didn't give enough detail. At some point, she does reveal her identity, but I think that Shimon reveals this stuff about his family because he's bored and in prison, and she brings him food. Maybe I should have mentioned that. She brings him food and drink, and he's stuck in prison. And he kind of is suspicious, right? That why would this noblewoman want to come and just hear stories? But he's also hungry. So I hope that's enough. It might be that you have to read it. Anyone else on what this might add, this retelling? Yeah, more. Exactly. So it's part of his doing teshuvah is that he's really rethinking his life and his choices here and trying to put some good forward into the world. Yeah, Sandy. A tikkun. Amazing, thank you. So Sandy points out this might be a tikkun, an act of repair, right? That he has done something wrong and he wants to fix it in the next generation. And I think that this is something that our modern midrash offers, right? It offers a sense of beginning of healing, right? She imagines that these characters who are so traumatized and have hurt each other so much can actually begin to heal from some of their relationships. The rabbis didn't give us not a backstory, right? They didn't, So another thing that it gives is an internal voice to us not, which we don't get from the Torah or from the rabbinic midrash. It gives us her emotion, what she thinks and feels, and it gives us this imagination that we could possibly repair and heal the relationships. The rabbis, they didn't have to give us not a backstory. They didn't need to tell this particular story about her. They could have really said anything. But in choosing to tell this story, they gave Dinah a legacy, right? They gave Joseph a partner whose experience matched his own. And they've added another way that God is pulling the strings in Joseph's life, bringing him closer to his family and to healing. So our midrashists, both ancient and contemporary, they refuse to let us not be only the wife of Joseph with no other story or identity, right? And by constructing her story, whether it's the ancient rabbis doing this or our modern ones, or us even asking questions about it, right? We fully humanize her. We affirm a reality in which every single person has a story worth telling and worth listening to. So, Shabbat Shalom, Chanukah Sameach.